have over $300 million appropriated for long-term housing for Florence. And we're coming up on the anniversary of Florence, and we still don't even have a federal register telling the state how it can spend its money, so we can't even begin spending Florence money.
Good evening and welcome back live here in Fair Bluff for Hurricane Florence Lessons Learned. We're taking a look back at what the state has learned, and as you can see here, how the state is still recovering. Fair Bluff hit hard by Hurricanes Florence and Matthew. Now, Hurricane Dorian recently hit, and we don't want to forget those folks tonight because there are many people that are still suffering at this hour. Let's go out to Emerald Isle now with our Mary Helen Jones, who was there during the coverage, there again tonight. Mary Helen, how are the folks doing out there?
For most of Emerald Isle, this is a normal Thursday night, but where we are standing just 1 week ago, a waterspout turned tornado tore through this area. The waterspout started in the ocean right over here, jumped those buildings and tore through the park where you can see those lights crashing down walls and then upending RVs like this one, turning them completely on their head. Nothing remaining. In this field right over here just a few days ago, there were lines of RVs that had just been slammed together, windows crashed, and now they're gone because there is a quick cleanup effort going on right now. It's a public-private partnership. There are trucks coming down from Jacksonville, from New Bern to help, and then private contractors also donating their time to help clean up these huge piles of debris that you can see around this area. People in the first days after the storm came over and they were taking what they could, but so much of it you can't salvage. When your TV is gone, you don't need a remote. Looking through this, you can just see all the personal items that people left behind. Couch cushions, there's a bike over here, beach chairs, just utter devastation. Part of this is a rental community, and we found out last week that some of the people living here whose homes were destroyed, they were recovering from Florence, living here while their permanent residents were still being worked on. The good news, though, during this storm, there was a mandatory evacuation here in Emerald Isle. And when we spoke to Governor Cooper here last week, he said that he believes that mandatory evacuation is the reason no one was killed. And just looking at this devastation, even though it was in a small area, no one was hurt. Thank goodness no one was here. I'm Mary Helen Jones reporting live in Emerald Isle.
Mary Helen, thank you so much. I appreciate it. We are back with our panel now. In fact, we've added to it. Dr. Tom Rickenbach, Atmospheric Science Professor at ECU. Of course, Mike Sprayberry, NC Emergency Management Director. Gary Stevenson and Jeff Crum, our Chief Meteorologist. Thank you. Mike, I want to talk to you for a second because one of the lasting images for me was I-40-995. Major interstates that had boats in the middle of them, fish on the roads afterwards, commerce shut down, had to move it to the western part of the state. Jim Trogdon, the Secretary of Transportation, told me they're spending about $225 million on average per year now. It used to be $65 million. How financially can we handle this moving forward if we're going to have as many storms as Dr. Rickenbach tells us we're going to have?
Well, I think that's a great question. To address I-40-995, DOT has just completed a study, and it's my understanding that what they're going to do is they're going to try to figure out a way to incorporate the repairs needed to mitigate those two highways with some work that they're already scheduled to do by clearing out drainage ditches along the side, maybe raising the road a little bit, and doing other things to make those roads stronger. But I would say that that's a good point, because as we continue to have these severe storms with the frequency that we're having them, we need to really take a hard look at the amount of money that we're spending and where we're building things, to include roads.
Do you think the state's doing what it needs to do as we're facing these increased and more powerful storms?
I mean, I think, the impacts of climate change are local, and it's the states and the local organizations working with the communities and the local and state government that are on the front lines of, coming up with solutions. The frustrating thing is that the big picture solutions are global solutions. So if we're going to mitigate the impacts of stronger storms and maybe make them, more normal in the future, it's going to require a global effort with strong federal energy policy, with strong working with their global partners. And that's something that's way beyond or sort of outside the reality on the ground in communities like where we are now, where decisions have to be made and resources have to be put into rebuilding infrastructure in a smart way, and relocating to other regions that are maybe a little safer out of floodplains, if that's something that, you know, it's a difficult issue for communities to grapple with, and the resources are, it's a very resource intensive process.
Particularly rural communities, small communities like this, that they're already struggling because commerce is moving into urban areas. Gary, what about these storms themselves following them, right? It seems like technology is better than ever, trying to figure out where the path is going to go, but it's like one little wobble can make the difference between a town like this and a town that does okay.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the problem, because when you look at a tropical system, it's not a spot on the map. It's hundreds of miles wide. And you can get all sorts of impacts. I mean, a hurricane, a tropical system, brings a lot to the party. It's loaded down with tropical moisture, and as Dr. Rickenbach's already talked about, with warmer climate, we have more moisture available into the atmosphere for these to drop even more rainfall. You've got winds, you've got tornadoes, you've got storm surge, and it's like you said, it all depends on the exact track. Again, Dorian, for example, followed a very similar track to Matthew, but the end results in this area completely different, because the atmospheric setup was not exactly the same as what we saw with Matthew. So again, it's a fine line on who gets hit sometimes and who doesn't. And one thing I was thinking when Mike Sprayberry was talking about infrastructure, you know, how do you really prepare for a storm that could drop 3 feet of rain in 3 days? Can you actually make a preparation like that?
Pretty tough, you know, when you have that volume of rainfall coming and that compressed period of time. What can you build that can withstand that?
There's no asphalt that can withstand
Right.
that. We saw that with Ocracoke just recently, where it looked like it was an earthquake.
I was there yesterday and overflew Highway 12, and they were working on it.
Jeff, you and Gary, we were joking. I joked you have like over 100 years experience between the two of you. It's not quite that much. But
I'll own it. Yeah. Right.
But from your viewpoint, talk about what it's been like to cover these storms over your career and where we are today.
Well, it's so different to be in the studio and then get out here in the field and visit the towns and talk with the people that have been so dramatically impacted by the effects of Matthew and Florence coming through here. And I was talking with one fellow today when I pulled up. Just he was in his red pickup truck checking us out, and he stopped me in the parking lot and we started talking. And he just needed an outlet, and he told his story of his frustration of the roof of his house still under a blue tarp from Matthew, survived the floodwaters of Florence, but is frustrated by the lack of understanding to find a proper roadmap that guide the often complex setup that is help from the governments, be it local, our state, or the federal. And there is an overwhelming sense in talking with a number of people here today, they just don't know how to do it. And they just kind of give up about it, and they're frustrated, they're angry about it. They don't feel that we have a government that's working for them, but rather working against them. I had no good answers to give the fella. All I could tell him was stay in touch with the mayor, do what you can to get verbal about it and to try to get some answers. But it would be nice if there were just a clearer path for these folks to be able to navigate the complex structure. And, you know, things change every year, policies and everything like that, and they're lost out on it on this end in these small towns.
Mike, I want to go ahead real quick.
Actually, you know what? I was thinking when we were planning this town hall, you know, I grew up in Dunn in Hardin County.
Sure, yeah.
We heard Hazel, Hazel, Hazel. That was the storm. And years went by before we had another Hazel type, and then that was Fran in '96.
Right.
But since '96, think about the number of storms that we have dealt with in North Carolina. We went so many years where Hazel was the storm, and it's still a benchmark storm, Cat 4, strongest one to hit us in modern times. But think of the number of storms that we have seen since '96 impacting North Carolina, and it's pretty incredible.
Mike, I want you to address what Jeff was talking about, because you personally have been under the fire for this. It is complicated, right? Can you talk about where we are sort of in this recovery and the frustration that people have with government trying to get what they need?
First of all, I'd like to say there's been $2.8 billion put out for both disasters already, for both Matthew and Florence. But if you're a homeowner and you haven't gotten what you're supposed to get yet, I mean, you can be frustrated. Just right here in Fair Bluff, there's 71 homeowners that are either being bought out, elevated, or having a demolition rebuild on their homes. So that's a significant, those are significant things that are happening to them. Just to, you know, get a buyout, you've got to find someplace else to go. And you're going to be given the amount of money that your house was worth pre-storm, which could or could not be enough money to find a new place. So we understand the frustration, but I can tell you, our team has doubled down on their efforts to make sure that we're doing everything that we can. We're working with the federal government to make sure that bureaucracy is simplified so that when people apply for these programs, to get individual assistance, you first have to apply to Small Business Administration to get a loan and then be denied. That's not intuitive. So we need to work through these kind of things. I can tell you, the CDBG-DR program, Community Development for Block Grants for Disaster Recovery, is a complex program.
That was the one that was controversial or under fire, I guess.
Right, and so we've now paid out over $20 million. We've got $108 million awarded. So we're working hard to get that money out. We clearly know that the disaster survivors are the priority. We have more money coming in, but let me say that for Florence, we were awarded $336.5 million. We haven't received it yet. So that's still, we haven't even gotten the Federal Register. But I want to tell you, like I said, $2.8 billion already out there. We're working hard. The team is doubling down. While we're doing this, we're also responding to other hurricanes. Dorian, and we anticipate doing a request for a federal declaration any day now. And so we're working hard, and we want the people of Eastern North Carolina that we haven't forgotten them. And we're right here with them, and we're step by step, lockstep with them.
Tom, I know you're a science guy and not an engineer, but I've asked the question a lot too. So on the coast, do we go instead of 10 or 20? Do we go further inland and build higher houses? Do we build up roads higher? Is that the answer of how much rain you think we could get from future storms?
Well, I think there's sort of, when we think about extreme precipitation in our region, there's sort of two areas that are vulnerable. One are the coastal regions, and one are inland regions that are in floodplains or near large river basins that are prone to flood, even for inland precipitation events. So it's almost as if there are a few places from the coast to the floodplains where sort of long-term development or building smart infrastructure, housing assistance for those regions are always going to be a problem that we're going to have. In the coastal areas, the additional complication is that we live in the Barrier Island system, from the Outer Banks to the southern sort of the Crystal Coast region, where those Outer Banks and Outer Banks Islands are very dynamic systems in and of themselves. People love to live on them. Everybody is there in the summertime to enjoy them, as they should. But in the long term, those systems, even independent of the impacts of climate change on extreme precipitation, those are very dynamic systems. They are constantly migrating and shifting. The beach erosion and the sand additions in certain places are things that people have lived with for centuries there.
And will continue to.
And they will continue to, and there are places where people want to live, and in some ways we're going to have to find a solution that we can all sort of live in balance with it.
Well, speaking of the coast, Wilmington last year, just incredible. Essentially, 40 we're talking about, cut off from the rest of North Carolina. Our Madison Cavalcari was there also for what seemed like weeks, trying to get off what was Wilmington Island. She went back and checked in with some of the folks that were impacted by Florence.
They let me open it up.
A year later.
Some I kept, but some I just didn't even try because the smell was there.
Sandy Shepard's precious belongings.
This is me. My mom, I think I was in college then.
Still bear the scars from Hurricane Florence.
And they put them in a particular area where we was going to take them apart and set them up. They were destroyed.
Sometimes through loss.
When I saw that, it was like,
you gain a clearer picture of what you endured.
Nobody can get to each other. It's a standstill storm. Nobody can do anything but just stand and depend on each other to help each other. And that's what we did for almost like 7 or 8 days.
Florence destroyed the roof on his home that's been in his family for 6 decades. But despite dealing with the damage, Sandy provided shelter for his neighbors, like 93-year-old Eunice Williams.
I was so scared, I don't hardly know what I did. I did the best I could.
Forced out of her home due to flooding in the small community of Maple Hill.
Still working on stuff like this here.
The recovery has been long.
It's weak, yes. So this could go any time.
There are more repairs to be made and loans to be paid.
And who's prepared to get a loan from FEMA at my age, 65, with probably 25 years to pay for a 30 At that time, I'll be dead.
There was just a pool of damaged carpeting, wet carpeting. Right
For Steve Schroeder,
then it started to go all the way out into the hall and down the hall.
the damage was over $100,000.
I was lucky. I had a lot of damage in the house, but everything was covered by insurance.
Insurance covered the costs,
This is the hole over the kitchen.
but the emotional damage
I really didn't anticipate that this sort of thing was going to happen.
still lingers.
I'll never forget it, but I hope I never have to go through anything like this again.
We're going to put you and Keith right in the middle, okay?
A crew rescued him and his neighbors from their Leland neighborhood, flooded by Florence's torrential rainfall.
I'm glad to be out of there. I was really feeling isolated and lonely and scared.
He returned home earlier this year once repairs wrapped up.
Just about everything you see here is new.
Others in the Stony Creek subdivision weren't so lucky, but still, they stood together.
There's a lot of talk about how divided we are as a country and a state and a city and a neighborhood and everything, but we weren't divided at all during Hurricane Florence.
Most of everything fell in this corner over here.
Sandra Bell is thrilled to be back in her downtown Wilmington home.
And I appreciate everything that everyone did for me. It was a blessing.
New furniture, cabinets, and appliances.
And the people that did my house didn't charge me a dime.
She had no insurance and no money to make repairs. Complete strangers like the sheepdogs gutted her house.
Because I had mold and mildew, they had to treat that before they really could do anything.
Then volunteers and neighbors repaired and refurnished the home.
I hope I won't have to go through it no more.
3 North Carolinians with 3 different stories that all share one message.
Let any state or any county know this can happen to you.
There's no question about that. It happened here in Fair Bluff, and it also happened in New Bern. When we come back, Reuben Jones catches up with people he talked to in New Bern last year.
This one here is the worst one I ever seen.
My life is gone. It was a war zone. Bottom line, it was a war zone.